Wyoming Territory, October 1878, the scream snapped through the wind like a whip crack. Yates Dempsey pulled his horse short at the edge of the ravine, rifle already up. Eyes locked on the weather-beaten cabin below. The scream came again, hoarse, desperate, a woman's voice, and this time he heard the sound of something crashing inside. He kicked his boots into the gelding sides and thundered down the rocky slope without hesitation. The plan was simple. Get in, get her out, kill whatever needed killing. Yates had been riding toward the town of Elk Hollow when he saw the smoke. A thin, wrong-smelling coil rising from a place that should have been empty. He had not expected to hear a woman's scream. He had not expected to feel the burn in his chest at the sound of it. But he had a rifle, he had a plan, and there was no time for questions. He hit the ground running, boots pounding across packed dirt as he reached the warped front door. Another scream sliced the air, then a man's voice, low, drunk, slurring something Yates could not make out. The door was barred from the inside. He stepped back once, twice, then kicked it in with his full weight. The door splintered open. Inside, a man with greasy hair and a pistol turned, startled. A woman was on the floor, her dark hair tangled, her dress torn at the shoulder. She looked up, gasping. Yates raised his rifle and fired. The man dropped. The cabin went silent except for the woman's breathing sharp, panicked, alive. Yates stepped in, still watching the man's body. "You all right, miss?" She stared at him, hands trembling against the floorboards. I am now." Her voice was soft but steady. Her lip was split. There was a rawness in her eyes that made something twist in his chest. He lowered the rifle. "Name's Yates Dempsey. I was passing by when I heard you." She pushed herself to her knees, then stood, swaying. "Cassia Brant, he told me he was here to collect for a debt my brother owed, but my brother's been dead 3 years. Yates looked down at the dead man, then back at her. "That was no debt collector. You got anyone else out here with you?" She shook her head. "It's just me." Yates nodded once. "You got a horse?" "No." He stepped toward her, careful. "Then you are coming with me. I am not leaving you out here alone." She hesitated, then nodded. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she wiped it away fast. Yates led her outside and helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. She smelled like pine and smoke and fear. She leaned back against him, and he held the reins with one hand, the rifle with the other. They rode hard into the falling dusk. By the time they made it to Elk Hollow, the sun was gone and the wind had teeth. Yates brought the horse to a stop in front of the boarding house and helped Cassia down. Her legs buckled a little, but he caught her. "I can pay for your room," Yates said. "You need rest and a doctor to look at that lip." "I have money," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Still." "Let me." She studied him for a long moment. "Why are you helping me?" Yates took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "Because I heard you scream, and something inside me said I would ride through fire to get to you." Cassia blinked, her lips parting, but said nothing. "Inside, Mrs. Wexler gave them a room upstairs. The doctor came. Cassia barely spoke. Yates waited in the hallway, hat in his hands, until the doctor left. "She is shaken," the doctor said, "but she will heal." He looked at Yates. "You did a good thing. She would not have lasted through the night." Yates nodded. The next morning, Yates brought her coffee and bread. She opened the door in a clean, borrowed dress. Her lip was less swollen now, her eyes clearer. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, holding out the tray. "You all right?" She stepped aside to let him in. "Better." He set the tray down. "I will be heading out soon, heading west, but if you need anything before then." Cassia looked at him, really looked. "Would you sit with me a while?" So he did. They sat by the window, drinking coffee and watching the town wake up. She told him about her brother, about coming west to claim a piece of land he left her. She had been alone ever since. Yates listened. His hands were calloused, his voice quiet. "I got land too, near the Wind River, nothing much, but it is mine." Cassia looked down at her hands. "I do not want to be alone out here anymore." Yates leaned in, his voice low. "You do not have to be." She looked up at him, heart pounding. The silence between them was not awkward. It was full of something warm and waiting. He reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. She closed her eyes for a second, breathing in. He did not kiss her, not yet, but she knew he would, and when he did, she would not pull away. The wood stove in the boarding house parlor hissed softly, drying the chill from Cassia's damp boots as she sat near the hearth, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of broth. Late afternoon light filtered in through thin curtains, casting long amber bars across the floor. Yates stood by the window, watching the wind tug at the empty hitching post across the street. "You always carry a rifle?" she asked, not looking at him directly. He turned from the window. "Most days." "You expect trouble most days?" He stepped closer, his voice low but clear. "I don't expect it, but I've seen enough to know it don't wait for permission." Cassia lifted her gaze to meet his. "You ever been on the other side of that door?" Yates didn't answer right away. He pulled a chair out and sat across from her, his elbows resting on his knees. There was a quiet weight to his presence, like he carried more than he let on. "I've been where someone didn't come," he said finally, "and I ain't forgotten the shape of that silence." She nodded slowly, fingers tightening around the cup. "I didn't scream at first. I thought if I stayed quiet, he'd leave. Thought maybe if I acted like I wasn't afraid, he wouldn't see me as weak." "You weren't weak." His voice didn't waver. Cassia let out a slow breath, the steam from her drink curling up between them. "He wasn't the first man to think I didn't belong out here, just the first to try and prove it." Yates leaned back slightly. "You plan to stay in Elk Hollow?" "I came west to make something of my own," she said. "I don't want to turn back just because one man tried to take that from me." He nodded once, then looked at her with something steady in his eyes. "I've got a bunkhouse that's been empty since spring. It's dry, safe. If you want to start again, I could help." Cassia studied him. "You offering charity?" "No," he said plainly. "Offering a place that's quiet and mine. You can earn your keep or not. Either way, you'd be safe." She set the cup down and folded her hands in her lap. "You don't know me." "I know what I saw," he replied. "And I know what I didn't." She tilted her head. "And what's that?" "You didn't break," he said. "You bent, but you didn't break. That means something?" Cassia looked toward the window where the wind had picked up, lifting dust into the golden light. "What about the town law?" "He was still a man and you put a bullet in him." Yates's jaw shifted. "Sheriff already came by, asked his questions. I told him what I saw. He won't be digging further." She reached for her shawl and pulled it tighter around her shoulders. "I never planned to need saving." "I didn't plan to be the one to do it," he said. "But I'm not sorry I was." The silence stretched again, but it wasn't hollow. It held something waiting, like the moment before a fire catches. Cassia stood, brushing her dress smooth. "You ride out tomorrow, before sunup." She looked at him a long moment, then nodded. "Then I'll be ready." Yates rose, his hat in one hand. "You sure?" "I'm done hiding behind doors," she said. "If I'm going to live out here, I want to do it with my eyes open." He didn't smile, but his gaze warmed. "I'll meet you out front." She watched him leave, his boots scuffing soft against the floorboards. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, but inside the room, the air felt still and certain. Cassia turned back toward the fire, her heart beating slow and steady. She didn't know what waited at the end of the next ride, but she knew the man who'd be riding beside her. The morning broke cold and dry, with a thin veil of frost silvering the edges of the porch rail. Cassia stood beside the steps, a small carpetbag in one hand, her coat buttoned to the throat. The bruising along her cheekbone had faded to a dusky yellow, but the set of her jaw was firm, her eyes clear beneath the brim of her hat. She didn't glance back at the boarding house when Yates led his horse around from the stable. He handed her the reins of a second mare older, but sure-footed. "She's called Mabel. Belonged to a friend who didn't come back from the war. She's steady." Cassia nodded once, took the reins without hesitation. "I'll take good care of her." They rode out before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops, the town shrinking behind them to a cluster of chimneys and smoke. The land opened wide ahead, all brittle grass and pale scrub, the distant shape of the Wind River range blue on the horizon. They didn't speak for a long while. The hooves struck rhythm over frozen ground, and a hawk circled above, casting its shadow over the plain. It wasn't until the sun was high and the air warming that Cassia finally broke the silence. "You ever think about leaving Wyoming?" Yates adjusted the brim of his hat. "I did once. Right after my mother passed, thought I might go down to New Mexico territory, see if I could lose the weight of everything." "Why didn't you?" He glanced over. "Because I realized it would all follow me, no matter where I ran. Better to stay and build something where I already knew the land." Cassia let that settle. "My father died in Tennessee," she said. "We buried him after a 3-day walk through mud to the minister's house. My brother wanted to get far from it, said the land was cursed. He came west and I stayed, until the letter came about his claim. You ever think he meant for you to come?" "He didn't say it straight," she said, "but he left my name on the deed." "That's as close as he ever got to asking for help." Yates nodded slowly. "Sometimes folks say more in silence than they ever do in words." They stopped for the midday meal beside a dry creek. Yates pulled a length of jerky from his saddlebag and handed half to her. She sat against a sun-warmed boulder, watching a pair of prairie hens scuttle through the brush. Her hand trembled just slightly when she reached for the strip of meat. "You're cold," Yates said. "No," she answered, "just..." Hadn't realized how quiet it could be when you're not scared. He didn't reply, just sat beside her, close enough for her to feel the heat of him through her coat. They ate in companionable silence, sharing a canteen between them. When she finished, she laced her fingers tight and looked out toward the empty stretch ahead. "I don't know what I'm good at," she said. "I taught school for a year back east, but it didn't stick. I tried tailoring, but my fingers blistered." Yates leaned back against the rock. "You're good at surviving. That counts for something. Surviving isn't the same as living. Maybe not, but it's the part that comes first." She turned her head, studying his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the faint scar beneath his left eye, the quiet steadiness in his expression. "You always talk like you've been through something no one else saw." He didn't meet her eyes. "There's things I won't say out loud, not because I'm ashamed, but because if I speak them, I'll have to remember them in too much detail." Cassia didn't press. She reached out instead, her hand brushing his wrist. He didn't flinch. Just looked down at her fingers resting there, then turned his hand over and let her hold it. They didn't move for a while, the wind rustling dry grass, a crow calling somewhere far off. When they mounted again, the sun was angling low and the shadows stretched long. The landscape had shifted sparser trees now, the edges of the high country beginning to show. Yates pointed to a ridge in the distance. "Just over that. My place sits in a bend of the creek, shelter from the wind." "It's not much, but it's solid." Cassia followed his gaze. "Solid sounds good." They rode on, the sky bruising into dusk. As the wind picked up, Yates reached across and tugged her scarf higher, his gloved fingers brushing her chin. She didn't pull away. "You've got a way of seeing things clearly," she said. He gave a quiet grunt. "Only after I've walked through fire, still. It's something." The last light caught her face as she turned toward him. And in that moment, when she looked at him full, he saw not just the woman who survived behind a broken door, but the woman who chose to keep walking forward, even when her voice trembled. He didn't say anything. He just rode close beside her, their horses moving in rhythm, as the ridge came closer and the first faint glow of smoke rose from a chimney beyond it. They reached the homestead just as twilight settled deep into the folds of the hills, that quiet hour when birds go still and shadows stretch long across the porch. Yates swung down first, tied the horses to the post, then turned to help Cassia dismount. Her fingers lingered a moment longer on his forearm than they needed to. The cabin stood low and weather-worn, its plank walls gray from wind and time. 2 windows faced east, the glass rippled and old, catching the last of the light. A stack of firewood leaned under the eave, neatly split, and smoke curled from the chimney in a thin, steady line. Everything about it said someone had taken care to keep the wild at bay. Cassia stepped onto the porch, boots tapping soft against the boards. "It smells like pine," she said, breathing in, her voice quiet with something like relief. Yates opened the door and pushed it wide. I cut last year's cords from the ridge above the creek. Lodgepole mostly. Burns clean. Inside, the warmth hit her first not just from the stove, but from the way the small space felt lived in. A narrow cot against the far wall was neatly made, a rifle rack hung beside the door, and a single chair sat at the table near the hearth. A pair of boots, worn down at the heels, rested near the stove. Nothing was out of place. "I'll clear you space," Yates said, already reaching to lift a saddlebag off the cot. "You take the bed, I'll sleep on the floor." Cassia set her carpetbag down near the door. "That won't be necessary." "I'm not made of glass," he paused, straightening. "I didn't say you were," she met his gaze. "Then don't treat me like I might shatter." Yates studied her a moment, then gave a single nod. "All right." She moved toward the stove, holding her hands out to the heat. "You built this place yourself." "Started it after the war," he said. "Wasn't much more than a roof and a dirt floor the first winter. I kept adding as I could." Cassia glanced at the shelf above the window, where a tin cup held a clutch of pencils and a folded piece of canvas. "What's that?" "Sketches," he said. "I don't show them to many." "Why?" He shifted, uncertain. "Because folks expect a man who carries a rifle to keep his hands for killing, not drawing." She turned back to the fire. "I never asked you to be anything less than what you are." They ate supper by lantern light: salt pork, beans, and a heel of bread warmed on the stove. Cassia ate slowly, chewing with care, her eyes tracing the dance of the flame in the lantern glass. "What did you hope to find when you came west?" Yates asked, not looking up from his plate. "I didn't come looking for anything," she said. "I came because I had nothing left where I was." He nodded once. "That's a kind of looking, too." After the meal, she cleared the plates and rinsed them in the basin with a kettle of warm water. Yates sat by the hearth, sharpening a blade with steady strokes. The sound filled the room with a quiet rhythm. "You always this quiet?" she asked after a time. "No," he stopped, looked over. "Only when I don't want to scare something off." Cassia dried her hands on her skirt. "You think I'm something to scare?" "I think you've been through hell," he said. "And I think you're still finding your feet after it." She crossed the room, sat in the chair across from him. "I don't scare easy, Yates." "I know," he said. "That's why I want to do this right." She tilted her head, watching him. "Do what right?" He set the blade down. "Whatever this is between us." For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she leaned forward, elbows on her knees, voice low. "I've never had a man ask me how I wanted to be treated, just decided it for me." "I don't pretend to know what you need," Yates said. "But I figure the only way to find out is to ask." Cassia looked into the fire. "You don't have to be careful with me." "I'm not being careful," he said. "I'm being honest." A gust of wind rattled the shutters once, then passed. Cassia stood, moved to the window, and looked out into the night. Nothing stirred beyond the faint glow of the lantern through the glass. She turned back toward him. "I'm tired of waiting for peace to come. I want to make it myself." Yates rose, crossed to stand beside her. "Then we'll make it here," he said. "If you'll stay." Her eyes searched his, the flicker of the fire behind him throwing faint light across his face. "I will," she whispered. "If you'll have me." "I already do," he said. She reached for his hand. This time he met her halfway. Cassia stood in the doorway of the cabin the next morning, arms folded against the early chill, watching as Yates drove a fence post into the half-frozen ground. His coat was thrown over a stump nearby, shirt sleeves rolled, forearms taut with the rhythm of work. The sharp crack of the mallet against wood echoed across the quiet land. She stepped off the porch and walked to where he stood, the sunlight catching the edge of her braid. "You always put in new posts this time of year." He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Ground sets firmer before the deep freeze. Come spring, they'll hold." Cassia leaned against the rail he'd already set into place. "I never knew how much planning went into a place like this." He looked over at her. "Most folks don't. They see a cabin and figure it just grew out of the dirt hole." "I didn't," she said. "But I didn't understand it either, not until now." He nodded once, then adjusted the post and gave it another solid blow. "If you want to keep the land, you learn to read it." Know when the creek's liable to flood, know which trees throw too much shadow for planting, know when the wind's about to shift. Cassia watched him a moment. You ever think about bringing someone in to help you before? No, he said. I didn't think anyone'd stay. She didn't say anything for a while. The quiet stretched between them, not uneasy, just thoughtful. Then she reached down and picked up a pair of gloves from the ground. Show me what to look for. If I'm going to stay, I want to do more than take up space. Yates met her eyes, surprised but not hesitant. All right. First thing, line the post with the edge of the rock bed over there. You want a straight run, even if the ground tries to argue. He handed her the mallet and she tested its weight. It wasn't easy work, but she didn't shy from it. By mid-morning, her palms were sore and her arms ached, but she hadn't stepped back. When they stopped for a rest, they sat beneath a bare-limbed cottonwood, passing a tin flask of water between them. Cassia rubbed the heel of her hand and looked out at the half-built fence line. I like knowing there's something solid under my feet, she said. Even if it takes a fight to keep it. Yates took the flask and drank. That's how you know it's worth it. She tilted her head at him. You think this is going to work, you and me? He didn't look away. I think we're both tired of wandering. And we're both stubborn enough not to quit just cause something's hard. Cassia gave a small, tired laugh. I'll take that as a yes. They finished the fence by early afternoon. Afterwards, Yates went to the shed behind the cabin and came back with a wooden crate. He set it near the porch and opened the lid. Inside were small cloth bundles, carefully packed. I never had reason to grow anything but potatoes and beans, he said, but I traded for these seeds last summer. Thought maybe someday I'd try my hand at something sweeter. Cassia crouched and lifted a packet. Turnips, carrots, beets. Peas too, he said. Figured if that someday ever came, I'd want something green come spring. She looked up at him. You kept them all this time, he shrugged. Didn't know what I was waiting for, but I held on to them. Cassia stood. Then we'll plant them when the ground thaws, together. That night the wind shifted and snow whispered against the roof. Inside the cabin, firelight flickered against the walls. Cassia sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through the seed packets again. Yates was at the table sketching lines onto a scrap of paper rose for a garden, a fence extension, a new lean-to for the animals. You always draw plans first? She asked. Helps me see what's coming. Cassia set down the seeds and walked over, looking over his shoulder. You're good at it. He looked up at her, his gaze open. I spent a lot of years building things just to keep busy. Now I want to build something that lasts. She touched his shoulder, then let her hand rest there. You already started. He turned in the chair and she stepped closer. You sure about this? He asked quietly. Living here with me? Cassia nodded. I'm not afraid of this land anymore. And I'm not afraid of you. That's more than I've been able to say about anyone in a long time. He stood slowly and took her face in his hands. I've wanted to kiss you since the day you looked me in the eye and told me not to treat you like glass. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The kiss was slow, sure, anchored in everything they hadn't needed to say and everything they'd already lived through. It wasn't new love, it was earned, it was steady, it was theirs, they didn't rush. They didn't need to. That winter, the snow settled deep and the wind scoured the hills, but inside the cabin there was warmth. They worked side by side, splitting wood, mending tools, tracing garden rows in the frost. Cassia learned to read the clouds before a storm. Yates learned how she liked her coffee, how she hummed while she kneaded bread. They didn't speak of the past. It didn't need repeating. What mattered was the quiet now, the shared fire, the slow laughter, the way his hand always found hers in the dark. When spring finally broke the ground open in April, they planted the seeds together. Bent side by side, hands in the soil, they worked in rhythm, turning the earth, sowing what they wanted to grow. By summer, green rows stretched behind the cabin and flowers bloomed beside the steps. The bunkhouse Yates once built for no one now held extra quilts and a rocking chair Cassia had traded for with the woman downriver. She never used it alone. By fall, the fence was finished, the garden put up, and the root cellar full. They went to town once a month, always together. Folks in Elk Hollow stopped calling Cassia the woman who came in bloodied and alone. They just called her Mrs. Dempsey now, and she never corrected them.